The first time the soccer captain who had always called himself straight got jealous over me. We had already shared the same hotel bed, and neither of us understood why that suddenly seemed important. Less than a week earlier, jealousy was the last thing I expected from Lawrence. My name is Piaras Rodriguez. I'm 21, and that November weekend I was in Boise, Idaho with the Cascade State University men's soccer team for a late-season invitational semifinal. We had spent nearly 4 hours on the road from New Mexico, and by the time we reached the hotel, everyone wanted dinner, a shower, and 8 uninterrupted hours of sleep. Instead, Coach Ramirez gathered us in the lobby and explained that a plumbing problem had forced the hotel to close several rooms on one floor. The staff had rearranged our reservations, which meant some players would have to double up differently than planned. I checked the revised room list and stopped when I saw the name beside mine, Lawrence Pratt. Lawrence was 23, a senior, our team captain, and probably the most disciplined person I had ever met. He was the kind of guy who arrived 15 minutes early to something that started 10 minutes early. With his blonde high fade, athletic build, and permanently composed expression, he looked like someone who had never misplaced anything in his life, including his confidence. We respected each other, but we had never been close. That made the room assignment awkward enough. Then we opened the door. One king-size bed sat in the middle of the room. There was a small chair by the window, but no sleeper sofa. I stared at the bed, then at Lawrence. Well, this is convenient. He dropped his duffel beside the dresser. It's one night. I offered to take the floor, mostly because I knew tomorrow's match mattered more than my comfort, but Lawrence rejected that immediately. You're starting tomorrow, Rodriguez. You're not sleeping on a hotel carpet before a semifinal. I hesitated, then decided there was no point pretending there wasn't an obvious reason the situation might feel strange. Most of my teammates knew I was gay. I had never hidden it, but I also never made it the center of my identity on the team. You know I'm gay, right? Lawrence looked genuinely confused by the question. Yeah. And this doesn't bother you? He glanced at the enormous bed and shrugged. I'm straight. You're my teammate. We're adults. Why would it bother me? That answer should have ended the conversation, and for a while, it did. We ordered sandwiches downstairs, reviewed game footage on Lawrence's tablet, and argued about whether our opponent's left back was actually fast or just good at anticipating passes. By midnight, we were lying several feet apart, staring at opposite sides of the darkroom. Somehow, the conversation stopped being about soccer. Lawrence admitted his father expected him to join the family business after graduation, even though Lawrence wasn't sure that was the life he wanted. I told him how exhausting it could be knowing some people saw the gay player before they saw Piaras. Lawrence was quiet for a moment. I never thought of you that way. How did you think of me? Annoyingly good at cutting inside from the wing. I laughed. So did he. Then we kept talking. Family, graduation, expectations, the strange fear of reaching your early 20s and realizing everyone expects you to know what comes next. It was the first conversation I'd ever had with Lawrence where he wasn't speaking as my captain. Eventually, the room became quiet. I assumed he had fallen asleep until his voice came softly through the darkness. Funny, I turned my head toward him. What? There was a pause before Lawrence answered. I don't talk to anyone like this. I didn't know what to say, so I let the silence settle between us. At the time, I thought it was simply an unexpectedly honest moment between two teammates. By the next morning, however, Lawrence would look at me across a soccer field in a way I had never seen before, and for the first time, I would wonder whether that night had meant something neither of us was ready to name. The next morning, Lawrence was already dressed when my alarm went off at 6:30. He stood near the window in his Cascade State warm-up jacket, studying the gray Boise sky, as if the weather were another opponent he needed to analyze. Nothing about him suggested our conversation the night before had changed anything, and I decided that was probably for the best. We joined the team for breakfast, boarded the bus, and reached the stadium shortly before 9. Once warm-up started, Lawrence became the captain everyone knew. Focused, demanding, and impossible to distract. The semifinal stayed scoreless through the first half, but midway through the second, I found space along the right side and sent a low pass across the penalty area. Lawrence reached it before the nearest defender and scored. We won 1-0. The second the final whistle sounded, teammates rushed from every direction. Lawrence reached me first and pulled me into the same quick celebratory hug players exchanged after important wins. There was nothing unusual about it until he stepped back. His hands dropped, but his eyes stayed on mine for an extra beat. Then someone shouted his name, and the moment disappeared beneath the celebration. I told myself I had imagined it. After all, less than 12 hours earlier Lawrence had clearly told me he was straight, and I had no interest in turning one strange glance into something it was not. We returned to New Mexico that afternoon, and classes resumed Monday. That should have returned everything to normal. Instead, Lawrence started appearing in the quiet spaces between the normal parts of my day. On Tuesday, he waited outside the athletic center after training because we happened to be walking toward the same parking lot. On Wednesday, he arrived with 2 coffees and handed me one without asking. It was exactly how I ordered mine. "How did you know?" I asked. "You get the same thing every time we stop before away games." That answer caught me off guard because I had never realized he was paying attention. By Thursday, he had started sitting beside me during film review instead of taking his usual seat near Coach Ramirez. None of it was romantic by itself. That distinction mattered to me. I had learned years earlier that kindness from a straight guy was not a secret confession, and I refused to create expectations Lawrence had never offered. Still, halfway through Friday practice, something happened that made that rule harder to ignore. Taylor Shanley, a 22-year-old midfielder from Westbridge University, appeared beside the field while visiting one of our assistant coaches. I recognized him from previous conference matches. Taylor recognized me too. "Rodriguez, right?" he called when practice ended. That assist in Boise was ridiculous. We started talking near the sideline. Taylor was funny, relaxed, and openly gay, which meant I did not have to calculate whether simple friendliness might be misunderstood. A few minutes into the conversation, I happened to glance toward the equipment area. Lawrence was standing nearly 40 yards away with a mesh bag of soccer balls over one shoulder. He was not smiling. More strangely, he was not moving. His attention was fixed directly on Taylor and me. The instant our eyes met, Lawrence looked away and carried the bag toward the storage room. That should have been meaningless, but I felt the same uncertainty I had felt in the hotel room. Taylor eventually asked whether I wanted to grab coffee sometime. I said yes and gave him my number. When I looked toward the storage room again, Lawrence was gone. I spent the evening convincing myself there was nothing to analyze. At 9:47, my phone buzzed on my desk. I expected it to be Taylor confirming our plans. Instead, Lawrence's name appeared on the screen. His message contained only 5 words. "You know that guy well?" I stared at it longer than I should have, because for the first time, Lawrence was asking me a question that had absolutely nothing to do with soccer. I read Lawrence's message 3 times before answering. "Not really. We have played against each other before." "What?" The typing indicator appeared, disappeared, then returned. Finally, Lawrence replied, "Just wondering." That made even less sense. Lawrence never just wondered about anything. He asked questions because he wanted information he could use, usually about formations, training schedules, or an opponent's weaknesses. I put my phone down and refused to turn 5 words into evidence of something neither of us had acknowledged. Saturday afternoon, Taylor and I met at a coffee shop near campus. It was easy. He told me about growing up outside Sacramento, complained about Westbridge's 6:30 morning practices, and made me laugh with an impression of his coach trying to use slang nobody under 50 had heard in years. More importantly, Taylor never made me guess what the meeting was. Before we left, he asked if I wanted to get dinner the following week. I said yes. On Monday, Lawrence somehow knew. "So you are seeing Shanley again?" he asked while we changed shoes after practice. I looked up. "How do you know that?" "Oscar mentioned seeing you 2 Saturday." "Okay." Lawrence tightened the laces on one shoe even though they were already tied. "Just be careful." "About what?" "Westbridge." I waited for him to explain. He did not. "You think Taylor is running an intelligence operation against our midfield?" Lawrence finally looked at me. "That is not what I said." "Then what are you saying?" He stood and picked up his training bag. "Forget it." That should have ended the exchange. But during practice the next afternoon, Lawrence corrected me 3 separate times over positioning decisions that Coach Ramirez had not criticized at all. After the 3rd one, I stopped near midfield. "If I am doing something wrong, tell me exactly what it is." Lawrence glanced toward the coaches. "Your timing is off." "My timing has been the same all season." "Then sharpen it." There was an edge in his voice I had never heard directed at me. That was the moment my confusion became irritation. After practice, I waited until most of the team had left, then found Lawrence putting cones into a storage rack beside the equipment room. Did I do something? I asked. No. Then why have you been acting strange since Taylor asked me out? Lawrence's expression changed almost imperceptibly. I am not acting strange. You texted me about him, warned me about him, and now suddenly everything I do at practice is wrong. I do not trust him. Why? He plays for Westbridge. I stared at him, then laughed once because the explanation was absurd. Lawrence, we play college soccer. We are not rival crime families. He did not laugh. That silence told me more than his answer had. Why do you care who I date? I asked. Lawrence looked toward the open equipment room door, then back at me. For several seconds, he said nothing. Finally, he answered, because you are my teammate. The words sounded prepared, but the pause before them had not. Then treat me like one, I said. Because teammates do not get to manage each other's personal lives. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. Fair. I left before either of us could make the conversation worse. Wednesday evening, I met Taylor for dinner at a casual Italian place about 15 minutes from campus. We talked for nearly 2 hours, and for once I managed not to think about Lawrence every 5 minutes. Taylor walked with me back toward my residence hall before heading to where he had parked. I was almost at the entrance when I noticed someone sitting on the low brick wall beside the front steps. Blonde hair, Cascade State jacket. Lawrence stood when he saw me. What are you doing here? I asked. He glanced briefly in the direction Taylor had gone, then held up his tablet. I thought we could go over Saturday's match. It was nearly 11 o'clock at night. I looked at the tablet, then at him. Lawrence had spent 2 days insisting Taylor meant nothing to him. Yet somehow my captain was waiting outside my building immediately after my date, holding game footage neither of us needed to review until morning. I stopped a few feet from Lawrence and looked at the tablet in his hand. You came here at 11 o'clock to review game footage? Lawrence glanced at the screen as though he had only just remembered he was holding it. Saturday matters. Saturday mattered this afternoon too. He exhaled and looked across the nearly empty campus walkway. I had spent days trying to give him reasonable explanations, but standing there after my date, I was running out of them. Were you waiting for me? I asked. I knew you would be back around now. How? Lawrence hesitated. You said dinner was at 8. I had mentioned that detail during practice, but I had not told him where I was going or when I would return. Lawrence, look at me. He did. Are you jealous? His expression tightened immediately. No, then explain this. I gestured toward the tablet. You have been asking about Taylor since the day he talked to me. You warned me about him without giving me a real reason. You spent 2 practices criticizing things you never cared about before, and now you are sitting outside my residence hall after my date. I told you I am straight. I did not ask what you are. I asked why you were jealous. Lawrence went completely still. For once, the captain who always had an answer seemed unable to find one. That silence was more unsettling than another denial would have been. I softened my voice. I'm not trying to corner you. If you see me as a friend, that is fine. If you see me as a teammate, that is fine too. But you cannot tell me I am imagining this while acting like I need your approval to go to dinner with someone. Lawrence looked down at the tablet. I do not think you need my approval. Then stop acting like I owe you an explanation. Several seconds passed before he nodded. You are right. I had expected an argument. His agreement caught me off guard. I mean it, he continued. I crossed a line. Okay. I am sorry. There was nothing dramatic about the apology, which somehow made it feel more sincere. Lawrence wished me good night and walked toward the parking lot without asking how the date had gone. The next morning, I discovered he had taken my boundaries seriously. There was no coffee waiting beside my locker. During film review, Lawrence returned to his old seat near Coach Ramirez. At practice, he spoke to me exactly as he spoke to everyone else. No unnecessary corrections. No personal questions. No lingering after training. By Friday, I should have felt relieved. Instead, I caught myself looking toward the athletic center entrance after practice, expecting to see him waiting there. He never was. Taylor texted me that afternoon about dinner the following week, and I stared at his message with an uncomfortable realization. Taylor had done nothing wrong, but the person occupying most of my thoughts was the one I had just asked to step back. I hated the irony. Still, I knew the boundary had been necessary. Whatever Lawrence was feeling, it was his responsibility to understand it. I could not do that work for him. Saturday's match came and went with professional efficiency. We won 2-1. Lawrence congratulated the team, and our interaction consisted of a handshake and a brief, good game. On Monday morning, I arrived early at the athletic center for a physical therapy lab observation. As I passed Coach Ramirez's office, I heard Lawrence's voice through the partially open door. I was not trying to listen, but one sentence stopped me before I could move away. I need to talk about what happens after this season. I continued down the hallway, telling myself it could mean anything. Later that afternoon, one of our assistant coaches mentioned that Lawrence had requested a private meeting about leaving the program as soon as the season ended. My stomach dropped. Graduation was approaching, so leaving should not have surprised me. But the timing did. Only days after I had forced Lawrence to confront the way he was behaving around me, he was suddenly discussing his departure. For the first time since Boise, I wondered whether I had been wrong about what scared Lawrence most. Maybe it was not the possibility that I would choose Taylor. Maybe it was whatever Lawrence had begun to recognize in himself. For the rest of Monday, I kept telling myself Lawrence's meeting with Coach Ramirez was none of my business. He was 23, graduating in the spring, and approaching the end of his final college season. Of course he was making plans. The rational explanation was obvious. The problem was that my mind kept connecting his decision to the conversation outside my residence hall. I had asked him to stop treating his confusion like something I was responsible for, and days later he was talking about leaving. By Tuesday, I had convinced myself that distance was exactly what Lawrence wanted. So I gave him more of it. I stopped looking for him after practice. During team meals, I sat with Oscar and 2 other midfielders. When Lawrence spoke during training, I listened as a player listening to his captain and nothing more. He seemed to notice, but he respected the boundary. That almost made it worse. Thursday evening, I met Taylor again at a small restaurant near downtown Albuquerque, New Mexico. Taylor was telling me about an internship he had applied for when he suddenly stopped. "You did it again." "Did what?" "Checked your phone." I turned it face down on the table. "Habit." Taylor gave me a look that said he did not believe me. "Your phone has gone off 3 times. Every time you check it, you look disappointed." I started to deny it, then realized there was no point. Taylor leaned back. "Is this about your captain?" I stared at him. "How did you know?" "Because you have mentioned him 6 times tonight." That landed harder than I expected. I apologized, but Taylor waved it off. "I like you, Piaras, but I am not interested in competing with somebody who is not even here. There is nothing happening between us." "Maybe not, but something is happening to you." For a moment, I had no answer. Then Taylor said something I needed to hear. "Whatever he is figuring out, do not become the place where he experiments with his feelings and then disappears when they become inconvenient." The word stayed with me all the way back to campus. Taylor was right about the part one had been avoiding. Lawrence deserved time to understand himself, but I deserved clarity too. I could care about him without waiting indefinitely for him to decide what that meant. The next afternoon, we played our final regular season home match before the regional championship. Late in the second half, I collided shoulder to shoulder with another player while challenging for the ball and lost my footing. I landed awkwardly enough that the referee stopped play, but after a quick assessment from our athletic trainer, I was fine to continue. Before she even reached me, Lawrence had already crossed half the field. "Piaras, are you okay?" he asked, crouching several feet away while giving the trainer room to work. "I am fine." His concern was written plainly across his face. The trainer cleared me, and I stood. Lawrence remained beside me for another second. Something in me finally snapped into focus. I lowered my voice so only he could hear. "Stop acting like you care more than you are willing to admit." Lawrence's expression changed. He did not argue. He simply returned to position when the referee called us back. We finished the match with a 2-0 win, but the celebration felt distant to me. Lawrence spoke briefly to the team, thanked everyone for staying disciplined, then left the locker room before I could decide whether I regretted what I had said. I went back to my residence hall, showered, and tried to focus on coursework. At 9:15, someone knocked on my door. When I opened it, Lawrence stood in the hallway wearing jeans and a dark Cascade State sweatshirt. No tablet. No excuse about soccer. He looked more nervous than I had ever seen him before. "Can we talk?" I stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind me. "About what?" Lawrence took a slow breath. "You heard I might be leaving after the season." I said nothing. His eyes stayed on mine. "I need to tell you why." Lawrence and I walked to a quiet study lounge at the end of the residence hall, where nobody else was using the tables that late. He sat across from me instead of beside me, which somehow made the conversation feel more serious. "I am not leaving because of you," he said. The sentence came so quickly that I realized he had already guessed what I thought. "I never said you were. You did not have to." Lawrence rested his hands on the table. "Coach Ramirez recommended me for a professional development program in Phoenix, Arizona months ago. They invited me to a trial after graduation. If it goes well, there could be a longer-term position in player development." I needed a moment to rearrange everything I had assumed. Months ago, before Boise. Then why did you only talk to Coach about leaving now? Lawrence looked toward the dark window. "Because my father expects me to come home after graduation and work for his company." I kept telling myself that was the responsible choice. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Apparently, I am good at following plans other people make for me." Suddenly, his uncertainty in that Boise hotel room made more sense. The conversation had never only been about soccer. Lawrence had been questioning the future. Everyone else considered settled. "Are you going to Phoenix?" I asked. "I do not know yet." Then he looked directly at me. "But that is not the only thing I came here to tell you." My pulse picked up, though I forced myself to stay quiet. Lawrence took several seconds before continuing. "When I told you I was straight, I was not lying. I know. I dated women. I loved my ex-girlfriend. Nothing about that felt fake. You do not have to defend your past to me. I am not defending it. I am trying to explain why this makes no sense to me." He paused. "Because whatever is happening with you feels real too." There it was. Not a declaration. Not a convenient answer. Just an admission from someone who clearly wished feelings came with instructions. Lawrence told me that after Boise, he had started noticing how often he looked for me at practice, how easily conversation came when we were alone, and how much he wanted those conversations to continue. Then Taylor appeared. "I hated watching him make you laugh," Lawrence admitted. "And I hated that I hated it." I almost smiled, but the seriousness in his expression stopped me. "That is why you were acting like he was stealing classified soccer information." Lawrence finally laughed. That explanation sounded better in my head. The tension eased for a second, then returned. "When you asked why I cared who you dated, I did not have an answer I was ready to say out loud," he continued. "I think I do now. I was afraid you would choose him, and I would lose something with you before I even understood what it was. Hearing that should have been everything I wanted. Instead, Taylor's warning returned to me. I could not let Lawrence's fear become the foundation of whatever came next. If Taylor disappeared tomorrow," I said, "would you still be sitting here telling me this?" Lawrence opened his mouth, then stopped. I watched him search for an answer, and the hesitation hurt more than I expected. "That is what you need to figure out," I said. "Not whether you can beat Taylor. Not whether you can keep me close. What do you actually want when there is nobody to be jealous of?" Lawrence nodded slowly. "You are right. And I am. Not asking you to choose a label tonight. What are you asking? Be honest with yourself before you ask anything from me." He accepted that without argument. A few minutes later, he left. I expected another conversation the next day, or at least a message. Neither came. Lawrence remained friendly and professional through practice, then did the same the following day. 1 week became 2. He never mentioned Taylor, never questioned where I went after training, and never brought up what he had confessed. I had asked Lawrence to find an answer without using me as the test. As the regional championship approached, I began to realize something unsettling. He might find that answer, and there was no guarantee it would be me. The 2 weeks before the regional championship were the strangest Lawrence and I had spent together, mostly because nothing dramatic happened. He did exactly what I had asked. He gave me space without becoming cold. He spoke to me after practice when there was a reason, joked with the team at lunch, and never once asked whether I was still seeing Taylor. I was not. Taylor and I had talked honestly after our last dinner, and agreed friendship made more sense. I deliberately did not tell Lawrence. If his feelings depended on competition, I needed that competition to disappear without him knowing it had. What surprised me was that Lawrence seemed calmer anyway. One afternoon, I saw him leaving the University Career Center carrying a folder. Another day, he mentioned that he had finally called his father. "How did that go?" I asked. Lawrence gave me a tired smile. "About as comfortably as telling someone their 10-year plan for your life has been canceled." His father had not taken the Phoenix possibility well, but Lawrence had told him he needed to make his own decision after graduation. That mattered to me because it had nothing to do with Taylor or me. Lawrence was beginning to question choices he had accepted long before Boise. 3 days before the championship, he found me outside the athletic center. "Can I tell you something without asking you for anything?" "That sounds suspiciously mature." He smiled. "I have been working on it." Then his expression became serious. "I owe you an apology." I waited. "I made my confusion your problem. I acted like you were responsible for making me uncomfortable when the truth was that I did not understand myself. That was not fair." There was no excuse attached to it. No request for reassurance. "Thank you," I said. Lawrence nodded, then started toward the parking lot. "That is it." I called after him. He turned. "You told me to figure myself out before asking anything from you." "I heard you." That was the moment something shifted for me. Not because Lawrence had suddenly found the perfect label, but because he had finally stopped treating uncertainty like permission to control someone else. The championship arrived Saturday under a cold, clear New Mexico sky. Before warm-ups, Lawrence gathered us in the locker room. Usually his speeches were tactical and direct. This time, he looked around at the seniors first, then at the rest of us. Some of us know exactly what happens after this season. Some of us do not. Either way, when you walk out of here, make sure the life you choose is actually yours. His eyes found mine for only a second. Do not live somebody else's plan because it feels safer. Nobody else could have known why those words hit me differently. The match itself demanded everything we had. Cascade State conceded first, equalized before halftime, then took the lead with 12 minutes remaining. When the final whistle sounded, the scoreboard read 2-1. Our bench emptied onto the field. Coach Ramirez was surrounded by players, parents cheered from the stands, and someone handed Lawrence the regional trophy. For several minutes, everything became noise and photographs. I saw Lawrence laughing with teammates near midfield and thought about how different he looked from the man who had sat across from me 2 weeks earlier, frightened by questions he could not answer. Then Oscar pulled me into a team photo. When it was finished, I looked back toward midfield. Lawrence was gone. I checked near the bench, the tunnel, and the locker room entrance. His bag was still inside, so he had not left the stadium. Coach Ramirez had not seen him either. I should have stayed with the celebration. Instead, I found myself walking through the quiet tunnel toward the opposite side of the stadium. Beyond the opening, the upper rows of the visitors' stands were almost empty. One person sat alone beneath the stadium lights. Even from a distance, I recognized the blonde high fade and Cascade State jacket. Lawrence had just helped us win the biggest match of our season, yet he had walked away from everyone to sit by himself. I started up the concrete steps, and before I reached him, Lawrence looked over and said, "I made my decision about Phoenix." I sat 2 seats away from Lawrence, leaving enough space that he could decide how close this conversation needed to be. Below us, stadium employees were already collecting signs and equipment while the celebration continued somewhere beyond the tunnel. Lawrence looked toward the empty field. I accepted Phoenix. I had spent 2 weeks preparing myself for every possible answer, but hearing those words still created a hollow feeling in my chest. Yesterday. Congratulations. I meant it, even if my voice sounded quieter than I intended. Lawrence glanced at me. "You do not sound happy." "I am happy for you." I looked down at the field. "I just thought maybe." I stopped before finishing. Lawrence did not make me. "You thought if I figured out what I wanted, I might stay." Something like that. He nodded slowly. "That is why I did not tell you before the match. I needed to know I was choosing Phoenix because I wanted it, not because my father wanted something else, and not because staying here might make things easier with you." I understood the logic immediately, which did not make it easier to hear. "So this is goodbye?" "No," Lawrence's answer came without hesitation. I turned toward him. "Then what is it?" He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "Boise did not suddenly change who I am. I have been thinking about that a lot. I meant what I told you before. My relationships with women were real. My past was real. But so is this." His eyes met mine. "So are you." I stayed quiet. Lawrence continued. "I kept thinking I needed to solve myself like there was one correct answer. Then I realized you never asked me for a label. You asked me to stop making my uncertainty your responsibility. That was exactly what I had needed him to understand." "And Taylor?" I asked. "What about him? Would you still be saying this if he were not around?" Lawrence smiled faintly. "I stopped asking Oscar about Taylor the day after we talked." "You were asking Oscar about him?" "Not my finest week." I almost laughed. Then I told him the part he did not know. Taylor and I decided to stay friends almost 2 weeks ago. Lawrence blinked. 2 weeks? Yes. And you did not tell me? I needed to know whether your answer changed when you thought he was still an option. Lawrence absorbed that, then nodded. Fair. The relief I expected to see never appeared. Instead, he looked almost grateful. Then I have my answer. I have been thinking about you without knowing anything about Taylor. The simplicity of it unsettled me more than another dramatic confession would have. Lawrence was not asking me to rescue him from confusion anymore. He had already begun doing that work himself. There is still one problem, I said. Phoenix. Hundreds of miles from here, Logan replied. That is not exactly convenient. Neither is pretending this does not exist. We sat quietly as the stadium lights began shutting off section by section. Finally, Lawrence turned toward me. I am not asking you to wait for me. I am not asking you to move. I am definitely not giving up Phoenix to prove anything. Good. But before I leave, I want to ask you for something that has nothing to do with soccer. I raised an eyebrow. One real date, he said. No captain. No teammate. No jealousy. Just me asking you. For the first time since Boise, there was no confusion hiding behind his words. Okay, I said. Lawrence stared at me as if he had expected a longer negotiation. Okay. You asked for one date, Pratt. Do not make me reconsider. His laugh followed us down the stadium steps. 3 nights later, we had dinner at a quiet restaurant in Albuquerque where nobody cared about our team record or who wore the captain's armband. It was not magically perfect. Lawrence was nervous. I talked too much when I was nervous, and we both laughed when we realized we had spent 10 minutes discussing soccer after promising not to. But it was honest. That was enough to begin. Months later, after Lawrence moved to Phoenix, and we somehow kept choosing each other across hundreds of miles, I thought I finally understood how our story had started. Then during spring break, in another hotel room, I found an old reservation document in Lawrence's travel bag. One handwritten note near the bottom changed what I thought I knew about that first night in Boise. The following spring break, I flew to Phoenix to visit Lawrence. Lawrence's player development program had turned into a longer-term opportunity, and I was finishing my senior year at Cascade State while completing observation hours for my physical therapy graduate school applications. Long distance was not easy. There were delayed flights, missed calls, busy weekends, and evenings when both of us were too exhausted to say much beyond good night. But neither of us treated difficulty as proof that something was wrong. We simply kept choosing to show up. Lawrence's apartment was undergoing repairs that week, so he booked us a hotel near the training facility. When we opened the door, we both stopped. 2 queen-size beds sat several feet apart. I laughed. Look at that. We finally get separate beds. Lawrence dropped his travel bag beside the dresser. Funny how that is not the scary part anymore. The next morning, Lawrence left early for a training session while I stayed behind to finish coursework. I needed a charging cable, and Lawrence had told me there was one in the front pocket of his travel bag. When I opened it, I found the cable beneath a folder of old soccer documents Lawrence had packed away while his apartment was being repaired. A familiar hotel logo caught my attention. Boise. It was the reservation paperwork from our Boise invitational trip. I almost put it back, but a handwritten notation beside the revised room assignment stopped me. It stated that Lawrence Pratt had voluntarily switched rooms with Oscar Sandoval after the hotel rearranged the team's reservations. I read it twice. When Lawrence returned around noon, I placed the paper on the desk. You switched rooms. He stopped halfway through removing his jacket. His expression answered before his voice did. Where did you find that? Looking for the charging cable you told me to get. I pointed at the document. You chose to room with me in Boise? Lawrence sat on the edge of the other bed, suddenly looking more embarrassed than he had during our first date. Oscar was originally assigned to you after the plumbing problem. I offered to switch. Why? He looked down for a moment. I did not know. That answer surprised me. You did not know? Not then. I just knew I wanted the chance to talk to you without 10 other guys around. He quickly added, I did not know there would only be one usable bed until we opened the door. That part really was the hotel. I believed him because the paperwork confirmed the room changes had happened before anyone went upstairs. So you were already interested in me? I asked. Lawrence considered the word carefully. Interested, yes. But I did not understand what kind. I liked being around you. I noticed when you walked into practice. I wanted excuses to talk to you. I just had no language for why any of that mattered. Suddenly, Boise looked different without becoming dishonest. Lawrence had not secretly known everything while pretending otherwise. The truth was almost more meaningful because he had not known. His feelings had arrived before his understanding did. "You could have told me this months ago," I said. "I almost did." "Why did you not?" Lawrence smiled. "Because once I finally understood what I felt, I wanted to make sure I was choosing you in the present, not rewriting the past to make myself sound less confused." I sat beside him, leaving the old reservation on the desk. For someone who used to hate uncertainty, you have gotten surprisingly comfortable with it. I had a good teacher. I shook my head. "Do not put that on me. You did the work." He smiled, and that was enough. There was no dramatic promise about forever because we had learned not to make promises simply because they sounded romantic. We talked instead about graduation. Phoenix, my physical therapy graduate school plans, and the next visit already marked on both our calendars. For once, neither of us needed to know every mile of the road ahead. We only needed to know we were walking toward it honestly. Closing reflection. Sometimes feelings arrive before we have the words, confidence, or experience to understand them. There can be a difference between giving someone room to discover themselves and allowing their uncertainty to become our burden. PR has learned that caring for Lawrence did not require waiting without boundaries, while Lawrence discovered that uncertainty did not excuse jealousy or control. Perhaps meaningful relationships are not built by having perfect answers at the beginning, but by becoming honest enough to ask difficult questions without demanding that another person answer them for us. There are also moments when choosing ourselves does not mean choosing against someone we love. Lawrence could pursue Phoenix. Piaras could continue building his own future, and they could still make space for each other. Maybe that is what made their connection stronger. Neither had to become smaller for the relationship to survive. If you had been in Piaras' position, how much time and space would you have given Lawrence to understand his feelings, and what boundaries would you have needed before taking that first real chance together?